Hello, Erica. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Hello.
Hello. Um, yeah, thanks for being here for this in-between database committee meeting. I have not much more to add besides passing it along to Kendall for a whole list of things for him.
Hello, everyone. I am trying to get my screen set up correctly.
You are very quiet, Kendall, or do I need to turn my volume up?
Well, I shouldn't be very quiet. I should be very noisy. I'm a very noisy person.
Okay, I'm cranking my volume up. Could be me. Let me get to where the agenda is posted on the RSA website. So if we go to rsanfp.org, you'll load this colorful banner for the support site. On the left, there's RSA board committees groups. And then there's database committee on the left. And then notice the agenda for today is posted right here. A little bit further down, I put the accompanying documents that were in the listserv post yesterday, and Kendall will discuss. I put those a little bit further down. So I'll open the agenda.
I am having just a horrible time getting anything to do anything here. All right, so let's see what is first on the agenda here. Discussion of the new, oh, okay. Gauging interest. Okay, yes. All right, so I will share my screen here, maybe, depending on if it will actually work. Yes, I will stop that. Screen 2, share. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen now. I'm still quiet. Let me turn up, oops. Let's see if I can turn up my volume anymore here. Okay, that is as loud as my volume will go. So hopefully that will work. All right, so I wanted to just give a little bit of background. If you've been at a users group meeting for the last year, basically, we've been talking about this basically at every meeting, but it was under the guise, or at least it started off as a conversation around reciprocity. And we've had this conversation at many users groups meetings and many different other meetings over the years, going all the way back to 2008. We've been having many of the same conversations around this issue. And so we've been kind of tinkering and trying to get things as set up to work as well as the system could make it work. But the way the system works, reciprocity is not 100% possible unless everyone is using exactly the same item types for exactly the same items. In other words, you would open up a record that had 200 items attached to it, and every one of them would be new book, or everyone would be book, or everyone would be DVD. No other item types. If we forced cataloging in that way, then reciprocity would work at a system level. But because we don't do that, we have lots of tweaks and little ways of trying to make it work as best as we can. And so basically, the conversation started off with yet another complaint of, either, I don't remember which one kicked it off this time, but it was either someone sent me an item that we don't loan, so I didn't want to give it to my patron. Was that the right thing to do? Something along that line. And so we started talking about it, and at that point in time, they noted that the reciprocity policy probably needed to be revised. And we said, yes, we'll start doing some work on this and see if we can't figure out if there's a way that we can make this work better. And so what we ended up finding out was that there was actually 3 different problems going on at once. and all of them were leading to issues that staff were seeing on the ILL front and holds fronts. So number one, again, was the reciprocity policy. The circulation subcommittee is doing that right now, and they have revised it, and they'll probably be bringing that for a vote at users group. Again, the reciprocity policy is the statement of intent for RSA. It's not what will the system do necessarily, it is the statement of intent. So RSA intends for the reciprocity policy to be this, and then we need to try and make the system support that as well as we can. The second issue that we ran into was that part of the reason why reciprocity doesn't work is because we have so many item types defined as new. There are different, like 5 different book item types assigned to new. And so that was causing issues. And as we started really digging into this, we found out that there are lots and lots and lots of new items in the system that aren't new. Some going all the way back to 2007 when we migrated off of our old Carl system. There are items that migrated into our current system in November of 2007 that are still marked as new in the system. And, you know, those are probably not new anymore. So the board wanted this cleaned up. We would like it cleaned up. And we've done a lot of work over the last 8 or 9 months to try and figure out how best to do it. So one of the things we did was we did a new materials survey back in February and March to kind of get a gauge not only of the people who come to users group meetings, but of our membership as a whole. We had 86 of the 144 members respond. All of our academic special libraries responded. Half of our schools and 61% of our public libraries all responded. So that was, for us, that is a huge response to a survey. We were very, very happy with that. And basically the way things broke out for hold rules for new materials, half of our membership allows system-wide holds on basically everything. About a third of the members allow local holds only, and about 14% of the members allow no holds on new item types. And you'll see the plus or minus counts there, and that's just basically the difference between a book and a DVD and a Blu-ray and everything else in your library. So there were some slight variations in those results, but overall, those were kind of the median results for each of those answers. So that's good to know. It's good to know that half the libraries are allowing holds and the other half are doing local holds or no holds only. And from the standpoint of the system, no holds and local holds only are basically the same thing as far as the system is concerned, because they act the same way at system level as we're trying to fill holds. So that's good to know. Something that has changed drastically since we launched holds in early 2008 is that very few libraries are now purchasing multiple copies of new titles and then doing something differently with them. So it used to be that a library would buy 2, 3, 4, 5 different copies of the same popular title, and each of those would either hold or circulate differently. And that required us to have a different item type for each different circ rule combination that a library wanted to do. And that's how we ended up with 5 item types for new books. But basically nobody's doing that anymore, so that was good to know. Other issues that we had discussed at several users groups meetings were how long is something new? How long should something be new? RSA doesn't currently have any guidance on that. And so we basically, what I was looking for is what is the longest period everyone agrees something should be the cutover point between it being new and a standard item. And at the school libraries, 100% of school libraries agreed that materials cataloged as new should probably stop being new at the end of the school year, which is kind of a summer project for us. And for public libraries, 100% agreed that things should not be new for longer than a year. Now, interestingly, 58% of libraries that responded to that thought that the 6 months should be the point at which everything converted from new to standard materials. But we don't really, we're not as concerned with what an individual library's policy is as long as it's shorter than a year. What we were trying to find out is what is the longest that everybody agrees that something should be able to be new. And everybody agreed that a year seems like the cutover point between a new thing and a not new thing. 80% of the people who responded said they were willing to move completely to new item types to fix these issues. 11% said no, and the others were maybes. The no and maybe responses were basically, we don't know enough about this to say that we would move to new item types without actually seeing the new item types, which of course makes sense because this went out without a great deal of clarity on what we might replace them with. And then the last question was, would you support a long-term project that would rework all the item types to reduce the number and to standardize their usage? And 62% said yes, and 29% said, I need to know more about this. And 5%, of course, said no. So again, comforting that almost everybody would at least be willing to look at a project that we probably don't have time to do it all this year, but maybe next year, to actually look at every item type we have in the system and see, do we need all these? Would it be better if we had less? We have a lot of item types in the system that have very few or no items attached to them. So there is some simple kind of cleanup we could do, but this would be a kind of a longer term and much larger project. So that's what we did. As you all know, there are many item types for new items. I won't cover this material. You guys are catalogers. You know there are many options for you. Most of you have really cut down the new item types that appear in your drop-down menus. So you are not seeing all of these item types. You're just seeing a couple. And I'll show you those figures here in a little bit. And basically what we are proposing to do is for books, DVDs, and Blu-rays, we think there needs to be 2 item types per new item for those. One would be like new book holdable, and the other one would be new book not holdable, or local holds only. And again, from a system perspective, if it's new book holdable, that would be system-wide holds. There's no line in the circ map for that thing. Basically, it's the same as a regular book, but it is using an item type of new book holdable so that you can get easier statistics on it. But other than that, it basically circulates the same way as a book, holdable by everybody. The other one would be new book, and that would be for not holdable or for local holds only. And again, from a system point of view, because that item is not leaving your library, whether it's not being held at all or it's just not leaving your library, from the system standpoint, that is the same thing. So we would just need one item type to cover both of those eventualities. And that would allow you to say, we're not going to do holds on DVDs, and we're only going to do local holds on new books. And your settings would then not affect those who were willing to loan them, but it would work for you, and it would also do the reciprocity piece because it would be able to look at you and say, okay, you do local holds only. So if there's another one of these local holds only attached to a different title, then we're going to block that hold because you don't borrow them. And then when we look at how that actually breaks out as far as what it would end up being, so of all of the new books, or of all of the new materials in the system, and this is all as of April 1st, 87.34% of all new materials in the system are either book new L, or new book. That's about 37,000 items in 80 libraries. We don't need 3 of these item types. They're confusing. Half the people use, well, not quite half the people use new book. The other half are using book new, and a couple people are using new book L, but no one's using them the same way, which is why we have the issues in the first place. So the proposal would be If you allow your new books to be system-wide holdable, you would use new book holdable. And if you do local holds or no holds, you would use new book. And you'll notice all these new item types start with N. And part of the reason we did that was we needed them to be very short because you only get 10 digits when you describe these. And they needed to be short enough that we could tell you not only that it was new, but what it was and if it was holdable or not. And so this was the only thing that really worked. Plus, it all groups together in the drop-down menu, unlike Book New and New Book. And there are some libraries that are using Book New and New Book, and you've got to scroll in your drop-down to get to those, which is, I'm sure, not fun. So, okay, so 87.34% of all new items in the system are books. 7.7% are new DVDs. Again, 46 libraries using those two things. It would replace DVD new only because we only have one new item type for DVD other than DVD-J. So again, NDVD holdable and NDVD for no holds or local holds would be our proposal. Less than 1% of items in the system are new Blu-rays, but new Blu-rays are one of those things that even though there's not a ton of them right now in the system, there's only 11 libraries using them and there's 416 things. They are basically, if we're going to do DVDs holdable and not holdable, we have to do Blu-rays holdable and not holdable for the overall item type. Right? So we don't want to go all the way down that road. So as you'll see in a minute, this is where the holdable and non-holdable stop. But this is for new Blu-ray. Also, I think there's going to end up being more Blu-rays in the system eventually than DVDs. So again, new Blu-ray holdable, new Blu-ray local holds or no holds only. Right now, there are only 2 libraries that are either holding or circulating a particular new item type differently. So only 2 libraries as of now would need to have both new Blu-ray H or new Blu-ray or new book H and new book, right? So all of you, this is basically a 1-for-1 swap. You would take anything that you have in these 3 item types and we would convert it over to whichever one of these 2 suited your library, whether it was holdable or not. Then we go down to the next most popular materials, DVD-J new, 7 libraries, 0.55%. Here we have new DVD-J, and this is holdable or not holdable, doesn't matter, it's just new DVD-J. And again, there aren't that many of them, so we don't really need 2 item types for that. We've hit the law of diminishing returns here. New audiobook and new CD book new, combined, those 2 are about 2%. Individually, they're somewhat less. So we've combined those into one new item type, new book on CD. And again, those would be holdable or not holdable just based on what your library is doing. New CD for music CDs, 0.6% and 0.55% playaways. So N playaway. These 2 crack me up because we had new CD and now it's NCD, and we had playaway N and now it's N playaway. But for having all of these codes be arranged and look the same, we may as well go ahead and replace them. Reason 1. Reason 2, we also, when we're doing this, we also have to think about the cleanup of the old new materials, right? So if I migrate all of your items that are a year or less old off of these 3 things to whatever your new code is, or in your library, you might say, just do everything that's 6 months old or newer, move those over. Then what we're left with is the legacy new materials codes. And we know that everything on these legacy new material codes for your library would then need to be moved off of those legacy new materials codes back to a regular standard item type. So by taking playaway N and making it N playaway, the end result is when we're done converting everything to these new codes, we know what needs to be converted from playaway N over to just a regular playaway. So there's actually two purposes behind coming up with these new codes. Then we get to, I'm going to do this middle section last. We get to the item types that are being removed or have already been removed but are kind of still in the system. New AV, we stopped using years and years ago. There are less than 20 items in the system that are still marked as new AV. Those will get converted. New Blu-ray 3D. As near as I can tell, one item was ever cataloged as new Blu-ray 3D, and that was an item that we cataloged under the RSA library so that it would appear in reports so that I could add it to people's lists, but no one actually ever used that particular item type. So nobody's selling new 3D Blu-rays anymore, so that item type is going. New book paperback N, new book S, MP3 book new. As of April 1st, there were no items in the system that use those three codes. I think there are a couple of book paperback news right now, like 5 or 6 in some library. But for 5 or 6 items in one library, we don't need a code. Okay, so here's the one that might be a little more where I need some input from you, especially since you're catalogers. New book with CD, the juvenile Blu-ray, the restricted Blu-rays, magazines or periodicals, and video games. So again, these are counts from the 1st of April. When I redid this the other day, the counts are different, and I think there's now 2 libraries using new video game, and there's like 10 items in the system. But again, not very many. The question is, do we need to make item types when there are only a couple of them in the system and one library is using them? And now it comes to the question of, okay, well, if we don't do that, how do the circ rules work for these, or how would the hold rules work for these? So, for example, the juvenile Blu-ray, the reason why this is in here is because, trying to think. Oh no, sorry. The juvenile Blu-ray were the ones the kids could check out, and the Blu-ray restricted were the ones the kids couldn't check out, I think is how the one library is using them right now. But again, one library, 20 items. Does that need to have its own item type, or is there a better way to do that in the system? When I showed the board my initial set of recommendations, as you can see, I do have codes for these. And that's because when I showed the board initially, I was like, here are all the codes I've come up with, all of these plus all of these. And I actually had codes for these too. And the board was like, that's too many codes. There's not enough people using them. You want this to be simple and standardized, make it simple and standardized. And it doesn't have to cover every particular use case. I was like, okay, I will do that. So that's how we got to this list here. And then these are the ones that I'm just really not sure of. So what say you, if we were to implement this, are any of you on the call currently using any of these item types? And you can unmute or type in the chat, either one. And if so, I'd love to hear your opinion on whether or not we should keep them or make them go away.
Hey, Kendall, I have a question just to help me understand this. So let's say we get rid of the new video game. If you have a new video game and you don't want it to go out for holds or maybe just local holds, what would you catalog it as?
So that is the question. And that is why I am wondering how we want to do this. So we do have to have a code for things that you're not going to allow to be placed on hold, and or you don't allow them to circulate, which is the other option. The question is, can we have like new miscellaneous, and that gets used at
I'm
whatever the
making a
library
yuck
level?
face. Sorry,
Well,
Kendall, I was making a
here's the
yuck
thing.
face. That was
There,
AV that we got
yeah,
rid of.
yeah. But there's less than 50 items system-wide right now using these, what, 5 item types, right? So I don't know. That's the problem, right? So new video game, I'm pretty sure those are blockers, just like new Blu-ray restricted. Those are used to block holds, not necessarily to allow holds. But are we best served by a new code, or are we better served by something that's, video game, whatever? I know we have more than one video game in the system. Hold on, let me scroll through. Several people replied back.
Galesburg says they're using Book CD new, but they don't use it too often. They can probably get rid of it. Lori at Washington, they use new Blu-ray J and new Blu-ray restricted for R-rated. They also use DVD S for R-rated movies at the Washington Library.
So Lori, on that front, do you use them enough that you need a new code, or do you just need Blu-ray restricted and Blu-ray J, and you put them in you use a location code or something else to denote that they're new? Well, if Melissa, it's probably not on your drop down, which is probably why you don't know it exists.
Okay, Lori says it's her understanding that they use the rated types because we restricted checkout at one time. Do you still restrict checkouts then, or is that something that you used to do?
Whole map.
I remember when we set these up, it was several years ago. So if things have changed, that's perfectly understandable. Don't restrict now, but left it that way in case we decide to go back.
So, okay, so Washington, looking at the hold map, I just pulled the hold map up. No holds on Blu-ray new restricted for everybody, and no holds on Blu-ray new Blu-ray J for everybody. Well, also no holds on Blu-ray for everybody. So you're using 3 different item types exactly the same way in the hold map. But we need to look at the circ map to see if you're checking them out differently. Sounds like you might be. Circulation map, Washington, here we go. Blu-ray, Blu-ray J, Blu-ray RS, all check out for the same amount of time. But let's see, for juveniles, is there a blocker? Does not appear to be. So it looks to me, while you are using all of those item types, you're not circulating them or holding them differently, so they don't, from a system point of view, they don't need to be different item types. They could all just be Blu-ray because they check out and they hold exactly the same. which is what I found for the most part looking through here. And again, one of the nice things, if we wanted to go back to blocking, circulating R-rated. Okay, so if you want to block things based on the rating code, you do need an item type to block checkouts, and blocking checkouts usually blocks holds as well. The problem with blocking checkouts for restricted R-rated movies in your library is that a kid can put it on hold and it'll come from a different library and it's not cataloged as Blu-ray R or DVD R. It just shows up as a DVD most of the time, or potentially DVD new. And it's not going to be blocked because all the other libraries are using a different item type. There's, again, without forcing everybody to catalog everything exactly the same way, there's really no way to stop that. But that's, if you wanted to do it locally for your items, yes, you would need an item type of some sort to do that. And we do have Blu-ray S, Blu-ray SP, Blu-ray J, Blu-ray RS. So there are standard Blu-ray terms for all of those as well that you could use to block. And, you know, COVID's a horrible thing, right? Nobody likes COVID. Except for us locally on staff. We kind of like it because we got hit by two things at the same time. Basically, the worldwide trend towards libraries going fine-free started right before COVID hit. And between those two things, libraries deciding to go fine-free and needing simpler CERC rules, and then the COVID restrictions coming and people moving to curbside service and just wanting simpler checkout rules overall. The CERC map and the way people check items out has so drastically simplified itself for almost all libraries. We had libraries that had over 100 individual lines in the CERC map, which is basically every different item type checking out a different way. And those same libraries might have 5 lines now because they're like, everything goes out for 2 weeks for 2 renewals, and except for a couple of things that have, you know, shorter loan periods, everything else is the same. And all of that simplification is what makes an idea like this, where we can have fewer item types and still have it work for everybody. That's why this works now, because people have so simplified what they're doing. All right. All right. So let's keep going on this.
Oops,
Go
did you
ahead.
see Lori's follow-up comment that they used the new rated item types so they knew what to change the item type to when taking the items off new?
Yes. So part of this will be setting up reports for every library at whatever your library's new to not new time period is, and sending you reports. It's hard to automate this, again, because we don't know if you're using book new, if when it's not book new, we don't know which one of those 20 different book item types we have, or 30, I forget, but there's a lot of book item types. We don't know which one you're using in your library, so we can't automatically change these for you. Now, we could help you do some batch changes if you have big batches, or we could set up an automated thing to help sort of automate it. It's semi-automated. James would still have to do it manually, but it would sort of be automated. If we knew that all of your book news just rolled into book every 6 months, things like that, we could help you with. Worst case scenario, we set up a report for every library and we send you a list. These are all of your DVD news. They're 6 months old. You know, what do you want to do with them? Or, you know, you can go through and modify them yourself, either or. We do that now. Some libraries take advantage of those reports and others don't.
Okay, there's a follow-up question in the chat. How will they know DVD new is an R-rated movie or not an R-rated movie if they aren't using DVD-S? so they know it's a new R-rated movie. I think the DVD-S, I think that stays the same, correct, Kendall?
Correct. The only ones we're talking about changing right now are the new item type codes. Just the ones on this list here. Book new L, new book, DVD new, DVD-J new, and the new Blu-ray codes, right? These are the ones we're talking. Everything else in the system stays exactly the same. We're not changing any of that at this point, because that's beyond the scope of this particular project. We're trying to fix reciprocity and system-wide holds for new items. That's our starter project, and this is anywhere between, we've been doing it for 9 months, and it's probably got another 9 to 12 months worth of work if it's as approved anyway, so that seems like a big enough project for us.
Oh, Lori
Sorry, you
meant,
meant new Blu-ray
yeah.
RS. Locally in your library, if that's going to be an issue, then we're going to have an item type for you, or because that's the only way you can block on it. Now, if you don't need to block on it, you could do that with a, is that an item category 4 or 5 or both, Erica?
An item category 5.
Yeah.
Before you move on, Kendall, when will the fate of these item types that are rarely used and should be removed, when will the fate of them be decided?
So I'm good. The board's going to talk about it next Tuesday morning, and then users group will talk about it next Tuesday afternoon. And I really hope the fate of all these things is decided at that point. If not, as quickly after that as we can get it done. Because there is 3 or 4 months of work on the system that RSA staff have to do to build all these new item types and then propagate them out to the catalogs and all of the reports. Every line in the hold map, every line in the circ map has to be modified to take into account the new things, and that's before we can even talk to you. We also have to do surveys of our member libraries. Do you want to use the holdable or the not holdable version? Do you not want to see some of these things in your dropdowns? Because we have to modify every dropdown for every library. So there's a lot of back end work that we have to do just to start saying, okay, on August 15th, everybody start cataloging with the new item type codes, right? To get to that point is about 3 months of work on our end, because we literally have to touch everything in the system so that when you start cataloging, we know that things will check out correctly. And then 2 weeks after that, we know that the courtesy notices will be correct and the overdue notices will be correct and the loss notices are all correct. So we have to touch everything in the system for circulation, essentially, before you start cataloging. Lots of fun. All right, so this whole thing came out because of holds. Holds were, people get upset when items move between libraries and they get turned around because holds don't, we don't loan it, or I sent it to you, but you didn't want it, kind of thing. So I thought, all right, I want to see how big of a problem this actually is. So I ran a list of every hold placed in the system since the 1st of January, 2021. Up here are the top 11 item types based on the total number of holds placed. I also broke it out into local holds versus system-wide holds. So local holds, you'll notice the farther down we get, sometimes the closer local holds and system-wide holds get. For example, new book, there's actually more local holds than there are system-wide holds. And that's because new book is one of those item types where 50% of the materials are moving between libraries and 50% of the materials are not moving between libraries. They're only used locally. So while I did run both of those numbers because it's instructive to know those counts, the thing I was really focused on were how many total holds were placed in the system and what percentage of the overall holds did new items make up. So no surprise, book is the highest. DVDs are 10% of our holds, but I could have sworn they would be much higher. It just may be now that with streaming, people are not doing holds as often. Our holds data gets cleaned every 15 months or so, so I can't go back 5 years and look at how many DVDs were held 5 years ago right now. But I imagine this number has gone down due to streaming. Our first new thing appears at number 9 in the overall percentage, and it's only 1.3% of the total holds, and that would be book new. If you combine book new, new book, and new book L together, that's 2.1% of the holds. 9 months we've been talking about this issue at various users groups, and 2.1% of the new holds are for new books, and less than 1% for new DVDs and new Blu-rays. So we're expending a lot of energy, but as it turns out, it's a very small problem, but it's a very noisy problem. Because when you're just borrowing a book or a juvenile book, nobody cares. Everybody loans those things out, right? Those move freely between libraries. They go out, they come back, it's not a problem. But when it's that new title that everybody wants, and it, that hold doesn't come back when you thought, or it goes out when you didn't want it to, that's where the issues are. So I ran all of the new materials that currently had any items in the system back to the 1st of January of 2021, and charted those all out. And yeah, those are very nice numbers, but there's a long tail here. So this little figure here on this side is by item type, by total number of holds, and then by overall percentage. You don't have to be able to read it. That's fine. I didn't put it on here in a readable form because we don't need to be able to read it. All we need to know is that this red line is 0.097% of holds or less, and everything above that is more than that. So the things in yellow are the red things over here. So if it's yellow highlighted, that's a new item. All the way down to new CD or book CD new and book paperback new that only had one hold in the whole year. Those are those two right there. So this gives you an idea of where all of the new item types in the system that are being used and had holds placed against them, where they fell in the big list of holds overall, kind of the long tail in the system. So there you can see there's a whole lot of items starting right here and below that had less than 100 holds total in a like 16-month time period. And that's fine. If there's 1 or 2 holds on some obscure thing, who cares, right? But it is interesting to see where these fell in kind of the overall distribution. So, and if we had combined new book, book new, and new book L, that's 2% total in holds, and that would have appeared about right here, right there. It would have been this line right there if we added those 3 together. So again, overall, not a huge count on the overall total of holds, but outsized noise because of how much focus there is on new materials flowing in and out of your libraries. So does anybody have any questions on that? All right. I'm just going to, oh, yes, go ahead, ask your Blu-ray question, Lori. Ask whatever questions anybody wants. Either unmute or type away.
A new Blu-ray J item type.
That is one of the ones on the potential cut list. As of the 1st of April, there were 11 of them in the system. So again, that is one of the ones that we need to figure out. And would it be circed or held differently than regular new Blu-ray?
Was this being kept, Lori, in case you go back to the old way of doing things? I know you mentioned that you're not restricting checkouts, but you kept the item types in case you might go back and do it. Was that right, what you were saying earlier? This was added when we started getting in Blu-ray discs along with DVD. So this one you would need continued. Is that what you're saying? Do you want to maybe, Kendall, follow up with Washington after the meeting, since they do things differently with their Blu-rays? I think though, Kendall, this discussion shows you can't just get rid of those, like in the interest of simplicity, because some libraries do have a legitimate use for those. So just keep that in mind when you're on the chopping block.
That's why they're on this row and not down here on this row where there's no one's using it, so why have it? All right, so I'll move down. This might answer, that's okay, Lori, no problem. This might answer some of the questions that people were thinking in their head. Had I done this breakout of who was using book new and new book both 3 years ago, this list would have been 2 pages long. It is now down to 7 libraries. Of those 7 libraries, Hudson uses 2 different circulation rules and 2 different ways of holding things. So Hudson does need, unless we have an error in our system setup, which is possible, as many changes as we've made to the settings over the years for COVID. But right now they're using book new for a 14-day circ and system-wide holds, and new book for a 21-day circ and local holds. So that's one case where a library would need both new book and new book holdable. The other one is Wethersfield Schools. They're using book new and new book. They circulate the same, but the hold rules for those 2 things are different. One is set to no holds, the other one is set to local holds. And again, I'm not sure if this is an intentional setting that they're using or if this is something where, something just got left or it's a legacy of changes to hold map rules and we just didn't get everything clarified exactly right when we made the change. But again, this shows you there's only this many libraries that are using both, and everybody who's not bolded does exactly the same thing with both item types. So you don't need 2 item types, you just need 1. And then what I thought would be interesting, and that is not on this one, is to actually run a list of who is using what in the system. So I ran a report a couple days ago, broke it out by library and the number of items cataloged. This is overall, there's no kind of time limit cutoff on this. New book is green, book new is, book new is green, new book is blue. There's an orange for new book L for the couple of libraries that use new book L. There we go, book new L is orange. Those 7 libraries that were using both book new and new book are highlighted in yellow. That's why some libraries are yellow. And then I explained what the circ and the hold rules were for those 2 item types. So again, Lexington is using both item types. They use book new much more often than new book, but they act the same way in the system, so they really only need 1 code. So I just thought it would be interesting to see, and I did not limit this to only the book item types. This is every one of the new item types in the system. And as you can see when I scroll, there are very few libraries using multiple new item types. Again, this is a change from a couple of years ago. Let's see, here's Washington, right? So Washington was talking about new Blu-ray Js and new Blu-ray restricted. Here are their counts for their two libraries, right? So they're using DVD J and DVD new Blu-ray J, new Blu-ray RS. The ones in red are the ones that were potentially on the chopping block or that we thought we could get rid of. Oh, here's somebody who's added a bunch of new paperbacks. Because when I ran the first report a month ago, there weren't any. So there you go, a couple of new paperbacks. So this is the list. Honestly, I thought that more libraries would have far more new item types than they currently do. Most libraries, if we look through this list, are using 1 or 2, and in some cases 3. Pittsfield uses all 3 of the new book item types. They don't need to. They only need 1. They all hold and cert the same. So not only will this make things a little easier for circulation, but also cataloging for many libraries. It will reduce your choices in your circ maps, or not your circ maps, but your drop downs. See who else. I should have marked who used the most. Galesburg has several new ones that they use here. So anyway, I thought that was interesting information. So that's basically the context behind, okay, we have all these old item types. There's no standardization. We need to come up with some standardized new item types to make the system work better and to fill holds more accurately at all libraries. And then, so this is support material for that decision-making process. So before I move on to the old new item types things, does anybody have any like lasting questions or concerns or anything about what I showed you here? And we'll follow up with Washington. Probably, Erica, probably in that same vein, we would probably still need to keep new video game because it's a blocker for holds and circs versus a regular video game, which may or may not go out.
The other thing too, I think about, and again, I'm not trying to be a wet mop, so to speak, but if you don't have a new video game item type, what's the item type going to be? So is it going to look like something that it's not if you give it another item type? Because then the format icon doesn't display correctly in the RSA cat. I could just see a whole host of issues. A patron thinks it's one thing, but it's actually something else.
Yeah. Well, we do have video game S right now as well. And I don't think anybody is using both video game and video game S. So there is a potential way to work around that. But again, I'll have to run a report and talk to the libraries that are using, because I think there's 2 now, using new video game to see if they're using both of those existing video game item types. Because what I don't want to do is
that Dunlap library would like the new video game item type as well. So I think if more libraries knew about it, they might
use
want
it.
to use it.
Yeah. What I don't want to do is create a bunch of item types that don't get used or very, very rarely get used. On the flip side, I also don't want to make people have to do backflips to try and get, I've got these 10 video games and they are definitely not being held and we're not circing them, but you can check them out in the library and we want people to know that they're available to take into the video game area. So, all right. So not seeing questions. We'll move on to the old new items. So just as background, I had to pick a date to run a report, so I used April 1st of 2021. So this list counts the number of item creation dates that are prior to April 1st of 2021. So they're a year and, well, 13 months old or older. I did not, because it doesn't really matter for this list because the number is very, very small. I did not exclude on orders or lost material, or I think that was it, on orders and lost. I did run that count, and it's less than 2,000 total items system-wide, so it wasn't a huge number, but basically, and I'm sorry for calling libraries out, but there's no way to show you how many items that you have cataloged older than a year without actually telling you whose items they are. So I just listed them out, and this is a very long list, so it's not like any one library is getting picked on here. For those of you that are wondering why Atkinson is on here twice, that is because this is the member level. This is who the contract is under, and this is the branch code. So for instance, C5 all is Cambridge high school and grade schools combined, but only the particular new book that's older than 1 year is in the Cambridge branch. And if you have branches, you want to know where those things are. So they're broken out like that. So you can find yourself over here and then know what branch it is. Here's the item type code for the new items. This is just a description to help kind of, because some of these codes are a little nebulous and you're like, is that the CD with a book or is that a book on CD? So I included the codes or the descriptions, and then just the number of items that are too old. And a lot of these, if we look at them individually, so Astoria High School has 731 new books that are older than a year old. Well, we would need to do an edit on those. Almost all schools are only using the item type of book. So that's a pretty simple fix. We call Astoria, we say, here's the count of the items, here's a list of the titles. We are proposing to just move these to the standard item type that you're using in your library that happens to be book. Mark anything off this list that you don't want us to move, and we'll move the rest for you. That's how we kind of see this working. We would need to work library by library down the list to help move things. Now, if it's Atkinson and they only have one new paperback book that's a year old, we're probably not going to bulk change that. We're probably not going to bulk change 22 things, because it would take us longer to do the back and forth talking for 22 items than it would for somebody to just grab a list of 22 barcodes and cut and paste those into workflows or look them up. So, but these larger numbers we would help libraries with. And like I said, I don't want to library shame anybody. This is a very long list. Pretty much everybody has at least something that's older than a year. So, no big deal. We understand that, especially in libraries where staff has changed and policies have changed and there wasn't good handover, that a lot of times things get missed. And so part of what we want to do as we're doing this project, and we're working with libraries to clean up old things, is to also find out what is your standard for converting books from new to old or new to regular. All right, we'll set up a report for you on that anniversary date of those item creations, and we'll send you a report at the middle of the month or something, and you can just work on cleaning them up as you have time. And if it's a big group of them, then we can work with you to do a bulk change. So that's how we see this going. Again, part of what would make this easier to do is if we did it either in conjunction with the conversion from the existing item types to the new item types, because then we could move everything that was a year or whatever your time frame is over, and then we would just know everything left in those item types needed to be converted to something else. And then for those of you who like to see kind of a step-by-step of the project work, the There was also a document included that is very, very rough and just kind of an outline only, but it gives you kind of the broad brush of what we have to do in what order and about how long we think each one of these steps would take. Surveying libraries, I have 1 to 2 months, probably longer. Especially if we try and do this over summer and the schools are out, we're not going to get a hold of a lot of libraries. So we know that. A month to adjust stuff in the system. Another month to figure out exactly how to tell you how to do on orders, because that is something else we would need to standardize so that we could know what we're reporting on and what we're not reporting on. A couple of weeks just to modify drop downs and workflows. This is all manual work. This is like 20 clicks just to get to the point where I can start checking boxes on your drop down lists. So that's a lot of work for somebody to get some carpal tunnel syndrome going. Modifying hold map, modifying circ maps, then doing bulk edits and things. All that is kind of listed out on this kind of overall plan of what we would do. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of, if we were to do this, how would we do this? All right. Everybody has mute buttons or not mute buttons. If you can talk and you wish to talk and you have thoughts on any of this, unmute and talk, or type in the chat. Either one works.
The safest thing would be just to exclude the on orders and not touch them. I know
we just need to know how to identify them.
Yeah, luckily, and chime in here because I know several of you in this meeting do on orders, but it's typically either the on order item type and or the on order home location. So I'm hoping based on one of those codes, we could just exclude these from the process so that way nothing gets goofed up that shouldn't have been touched. That's one of my main concerns, as you know, Kendall, that the on orders get flipped and then it messes things up from there.
And that's why I say we just need to be able to know what is our standard for things that we're ignoring. Step 3, default prices. All right, so default prices. There is a table in the system. There's many tables in the system to explain to the system what things are, how they act, and how to do various things with them. One of those tables is what we call the default price listing. And that is basically every item type in the system has a default system-wide price, right? So new book might be set at $30, new DVD might be set at $40, new paperbacks are probably like $8, kids books are maybe less expensive than adult new materials. So at a system level, every time we add a new item type into the system, we also have to add a corresponding default price for that item type, at least at system level. And how this is used is when an item goes lost, or in those of you who charge overdue fees up to the price of the item, the system needs to know what the price of the item is. And if you did not enter a price in the item when you created the item, so that's 0 on when you look at your item, if it says 0 for the price, then the system goes, oh, well, they didn't add a price, I'll just use the default price. And so then the system goes back to that default price table, and the first thing it does is look to see if your library has a default price for that particular item type. So in addition to the system having default prices for everything, each individual library can have default prices for everything. And if you charge a processing fee, we have to add a default price, because the default price is where we set the processing fee. So again, one of the many things that we have to communicate, which each library to, is do you have a default price for this item that is different than the system default price? And if it's not different, if it's, whatever the default system price is, then we wouldn't add it. There would be no reason to. But if you had a processing fee of, say, $5 for a lost item, then we would have to add a default price for that item type for your library or all of your branches, because it's used when the billing happens. So it's yet one more place in the system that we have to go through and touch per library and check per library. And we have 194 or 195 automated libraries in our system. So that's 195 different sets of default pricing. We at least have to check whether or not we add anything for you or not. I don't know, but we still have to check to make sure that it is set correctly.
It looks like for Pekin, for the new book item type, you have $25 as your default price. So that means when the new book item type is set up, we would make sure that that price is the default for the new book item type. Is that right, Kendall?
Correct, yes.
Okay, yeah.
And if they've got one set, it's either different than the system setting or it's because they do, like I said, they've got a processing fee. Oh, Carla's waiting to get in.
Oh, I don't see it. Where?
I just let her in.
Okay, I didn't see that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, she hasn't been waiting all that long, I don't believe. Hi, Carla, welcome. You've come just at the end where I was asking for everyone's opinion. And we're taking questions or concerns at this point about any of this.
Do you want to summarize our next steps, Kendall? I know you've touched on them a little bit. This will be brought to users group next Tuesday.
Correct. Well, I would be interested just to know, kind of in an informal vote amongst those who are attending the meeting today, how many of you think this is a good idea to press forward with this and go ahead and do this? Of course, we've got a little tweaking to do down on this. We may end up with the new video game and the 2 new Blu-rays added to this list as well. But basically, with those caveats, how many of you agree that this is probably the best way to move forward? And you, from your cataloging perspective, are like, yes, we can do it. We can deal with this. Well, that's a fairly positive response rate. Thank you. Appreciate that. It is going to cause you all some work, and I'm sorry about that, but there'll be a lot of back and forth. As you can see, there are many steps to this and many different places where we have to get information from you. And I'm sure whatever the first survey does, we will have forgotten to ask some questions that we'll get about a month later and go, oh, we forgot to ask everybody about this thing. So there may be a couple of surveys that would come out to gather your information. And then we would start working with libraries kind of one-on-one. So there will be some significant amount of bursts of activity for each and every one of you. On our end, it will be just a constant stream of mostly James and some member services staff who will be making changes to workflows and workflow settings, and then kind of some bulk changes as well. Keep us busy for a while. All right. That was the end of my I was going to say presentation, but the more accurate term is the end of my mental abilities for the day. Now I'm worn out. So before I post this document to the users group package, I need to modify it to make some changes on the potential replacements for rarely used items and move those up. So you should see a slightly updated version of this in the users group package that'll come out either tomorrow or Thursday. So, but other than that, there shouldn't be very many changes. What is the, relinquish is the wrong term. What is it you do when you're done speaking and you give up your floor? There's a term for that and I've just lost it. I yield the remainder of my time back to our chair. There we go.
That works. I couldn't think of the word either. Yeah, this makes me glad that we're one of those libraries that simplified things a lot. But yeah, thank you for this. This is all very useful. So our next, there's no next in-between meeting. Those will be scheduled as necessary. Our next full meeting will be Friday, May 20th, which somehow already May, which I still haven't wrapped my head around, at 9:30, from 9:30 to noon on Zoom. Registration looks like it is available. And then after that, gosh, Wednesday, September 21st, also in Zoom and possibly in person, to be determined. September's in theory a long way away. I think that's all I've got. Thanks for joining us today. I don't think it's started raining yet, so I'm glad of that at my house anyway. So everybody has a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your comments and your concerns. This is all very helpful.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Jennifer.